So the last section is the data extraction, and the data extraction is just a section of the participant's initial assessment where it asks for information from the medical record. And this is just a purely data entry form. Usually the coordinators will be doing that, or someone who's designated by the coordinator, and they will train you on that separately. So for study documents, if you're ever filing study documents, just for you to know, all the study forms with personal information like the consent forms, signatures, the documentation pages, anywhere they've written down their address, those should all go in one folder. And then anything that doesn't have identifying information, so questionnaires or any other kind of assessment, the biologics info, all of that should go in a separate study folder. So there's a sort of personal information folder and then a research record folder, and those get stored in separate places in a locked filing cabinet in a locked room, both labeled with a participant ID number, and make sure you label them on every page so that we have so that we know which is which. And all research records, so medical records and paper assessments, should all be de-identified. So if the participant writes their name on anything or the medical record has their name on it, you'll want to de-identify that before storing it. All right, so let's go back to the study timeline. We've already done the initial assessment. The next part is the phone call. So the initial call has to be the same RA as the initial assessment. So you will be calling in 48 to 72 hours to follow up with the person. You can begin calling 2 days after the initial assessment, like I said, and stop calling 7 days after the initial. So if on the 7th day you don't hear back from them, we'll consider them lost to follow-up, so you can stop calling them at that point. There is a phone script in your binder under the 1 week tab, and I'll show you what it looks like in just a second. You can schedule this visit for 7 to 14 days after the initial. So ideally, we want it as close to 7 days as possible, but the person can come in up to 14 days later. And if someone is a little bit outside the window, it's okay. We would prefer for them to be at 7 or between 7 and 14. But if someone comes in on, day 6 or day 15, just let us know. And we'd rather them come in if that's the only time they can schedule than not have them come in. And they can meet you at the clinic or they can meet you somewhere else in the community. But this is based on your site. So talk to your coordinator about their policy for where you should and shouldn't meet participants. And here is the example I was talking about of the initial telephone script. And again, this is in your 1 week tab in your binder. And you'll use this to help you walk through that initial phone call. And this form actually has to be read. We submit this to the IRB, and so they will want you to read this verbatim. Obviously, the appointment part can't be read verbatim, but the most of the intros and everything will be read just like it appears on the page. So once the person completes that initial assessment, we send them a thank you letter, and then if they come back for the 1 week, 6 week, and etc. Interviews and appointments, then we go ahead and start sending them letters and text messages and emails to remind them about their follow-up. And this is only if they give us permission to contact them in that way. So if if some people might give us permission to text or email, some might not, and that's fine. We get an address from everyone, so we'll send everyone letters, but those will happen only after the 1 week assessment. And this is just a way to get them to start thinking about follow-up before you guys start calling and we start calling at UNC. I'm going to talk briefly about the 1 week assessment. The 1 week assessment is very database driven. There's not a lot of extra activity going on besides just the consent forms and the assessments. So we'll talk about that. So the consent process at the 1 week assessment is the full consent. And so right now, at the 1 week time point, we're consenting them to be able to contact them for future visits and participate in the entire study. And this includes the blood storage. So consenting for us to store blood indefinitely, and we won't put any identifiers on the blood. So that's better explained in a blood storage consent script, which you have in your SOP, but the consent process for this time point is just it's important to remember that now they're consenting for the entire study for us to follow up with them and for us to store their blood. You'll also document this process in the database just like you did for the initial assessment. And again, if you rely on UNC's IRB, so Tulsa, Albuquerque, Wayne, and Birmingham, you can scan an email securely or fax both of those to me. So collecting contact information at the 1 week assessment has a very detailed standard operating procedure, and that's really important because we want to make sure that we get as accurate as information as possible. We might be at some point sending them payments via check or trying to follow up with them, and so we want to make sure that this information is not only accurate but up to date as much as possible. We also get alternate contacts for everyone, and this is important especially for people who move a lot or don't consistently have cell service. And we ask for 2 people because we want to make sure that we are able to contact them if they move in 6 months. The assessments at this time point are completed independently, so you're basically available in case there are questions, but otherwise let them fill out the forms themselves. They take 60 to 90 minutes to complete, and you'll want to, at the end of the assessment, just double check, not for content, but for accuracy. So did they fill out all the questions? Did they follow the skip patterns correctly? Did they answer the questions correctly and fill in all the bubbles that they needed to? At this time point, there's also a mobile app procedure where we'll ask continuous questions between follow-up visits about pain and PTSD. And this is something that will not be rolled out in the very beginning of the study, but you'll get more information about later. But just for now, to know that the person will get information about the study at the end of the 1 week assessment, and if they voluntarily choose to participate in this part of the study, they'll get assessments every few days for 6 weeks and every other week after that. At the 1 week assessment, you can also store more study phone numbers in their phone. So if you want to create a contact, or you already have maybe created a contact in their phone for the women's health study, you can put in the hospital or clinic's number, your office number, my number, so the UNC number, the UNC cell phone number, which is in your SOP. So any number that you want to put in the phone is great because they might get contacts from any number of those. All right, so again, here's the study timeline again. So we've talked about the initial, the phone call, and the 1 week. The last 3 visits are very similar, these follow-up visits. So at 6 weeks, 6 months, and 1 year, we recontact people to talk with them again. These are much shorter, 45 to 60 minutes of questionnaires, and it's the assessment only. So there's no consent process during these visits. So they're a lot more straightforward. They're basically just meeting to complete the assessment, and then they're done. They can complete them independently again, but remember that you'll want to check over and just make sure that they've filled everything out correctly if they did it on paper. They can complete it in 3 different ways. So one of the ways that we encourage is the appointment with you, or if they can't do that, they can complete it online. So for example, if they don't have transportation or it's not very convenient to come back to the clinic, that's an option. And then only in very rare circumstances, we'll let them complete it over the phone. We don't really like to let them complete it over the phone because we talk a lot about privacy and how they don't have to talk out loud about the information and the study's designed so they can do everything independently. But if this is the only way that they're able to do it, then we may let them do it over the phone. So if someone wants to complete over the phone, give us a call at UNC and we can talk about it. I want to talk about payments. The initial assessment, the person gets $20 for their blood draw. At the 1 week, they receive $50. And then at the 6 week, 6 month, and 1 year appointments, it changes based on how they complete. So if they come in person, it's $50. If they do it online, it's $30. And if they do it over the phone, it's $25. They can either get a gift card if they come in person, or we can mail them a check if they do it online or via telephone. The follow-up windows, I just want to talk a little bit about windows. The database will automatically show you who is in a window, and you will probably also get several emails from UNC just reminding you who's in their window, who needs to be called. But in a window means that the person's time period for being able to complete their follow-up assessment has opened. And so in general, the 6-week window is 4 to 8 weeks after the initial assessment, so 2 weeks on either side of the true 6-week mark. The 6-month window is 2 weeks before 6 months and 2 weeks after 6 months. And then the 1-year window is a month on either side of 1 year from the initial assessment. And at follow-up call time, there's a follow-up phone script in your binder under the follow-up section. You'll call them daily during their window, just like the 1 week, and you'll call them during the times that they've recorded are the best times to reach them. And we'll help remind you again at UNC who is in their window. So we'll start contacting you and emailing you and calling you and letting you know this person's in their window or that person needs to be called. And they will probably also call the toll-free number sometimes, which will help you coordinate. If the computer is down or the internet's down and you need to do a survey, there will be paper backups at all of the sites, and we'll make sure you always have up-to-date copies of those forms, but just store paper copies with the research records in the folder that's not the consent folder. And you can talk to your coordinator more about that if you need to ever do that. So we've gone through the entire initial assessment and explained the follow-ups and talked about the database. I want to talk now a little bit about anything that might happen that we might need to report to the IRB. So an adverse event or an unanticipated problem is an event that happens that wasn't expected that could put a participant at greater risk. And sometimes when these things happen, well, we always talk about them. You'll always call us and let us know what happened, and then we'll talk with the PIs and determine whether it's something that should be reported to either of the site's IRBs. If something like this happens to you, you can tell the coordinator. We don't expect you to have many of these, and so I want to give you a little bit of background so you understand what we're talking about. Adverse events are much more common in something like a clinical trial or a drug study, because if someone's taking an experimental drug, there might be a side effect that we don't know about or something that happens that needs to be documented. In an observational study like this, we're not providing treatment. There's not an intervention. So adverse events, while they can occur, are not as common. So I'll give you a few examples of things that might happen, but you'll know if there is something that you kind of feel off about, you'll know and you'll be able to tell us. Always let us know if something like that happens. You can call us and we can help you decide if you need to report it. There's a form in your binder that shows you how to report an adverse event, but that's basically just for your, you'll never have to really use that. It's more for you to know kind of the information we'll be asking for. So examples of this type of event are, for example, when someone comes in for their 1-week assessment, they show you their jaw site and they have a bruise there. I'm not talking a little bruise. I'm talking like there's a big bruise on their arm and maybe it's causing them pain. Something like that might be considered an adverse event. Again, very unlikely. This one is definitely an adverse event, and hopefully nothing like this would ever happen, but anytime someone's confidentiality is broken, it's considered an adverse event. So they get up in the middle of the interview, they go use the restroom, and then you turn around and you find out that someone else is looking through their responses on the computer. That would be considered an adverse event. Okay, this last one is a little bit tricky, and so I want to give you a chance to read it. Someone gets upset during the assessment. You check her to make sure she's okay. She talks to you about how she's having a really hard time. This is a normal reaction, or this is an expected reaction maybe after someone has experienced trauma. And so what we're talking about here is something that you would consider kind of over and above what you would expect of someone who's just dealing with trauma, but someone that says that, because there are triggers all the time with someone who's experienced a traumatic event, but this is kind of more than you would expect the person to be triggered by the assessments. And so if you notice that someone is just really, really upset, or they can't continue the interview because they say that the assessments were really difficult for them, that's maybe something you'd want to talk to us about. But in general, this is sort of expected, and so you'll just have to use your judgment about whether you want to give us a call. But always give us a call if you are, doubting or you're concerned about something, and we can talk through it together. Okay, so we've talked about all these bad things that could potentially happen. What we want to do is prepare you for any situation that could arise, but we also want to let you know that in the pilot study that we did, we didn't have adverse reactions really, and we actually had a really positive response from our participants. There are a lot of things that people said that really showed that the study they felt like they were doing something good to help people. They felt like the studying or participating in the study was a positive experience. And so we want to talk about, or we want to tell you that as a caveat to sometimes there might be an adverse event, but they're very rare. All right, so I just want to show you the supplies that will be available to you as part of the study. You'll have a study laptop and iPad. You'll have initial assessment packets just like are in front of you. And you'll have everything you need for all the blood samples, and you'll have everything that you need to complete a study visit and all of the follow-up visits at the site. If you ever find that something's missing, give us a call and we're happy to send to you whatever you need to be able to complete an assessment. So as far as future training, you've done this training here. And then ongoing training, we'll actually complete a mock participant with you over the phone. Once you've had a chance to go through all of this training and practice on your own a little bit, we'll set up a call. When you're done with this training, go ahead and let your coordinator and also the UNC team know that you've completed it. And we will set up a time with you to complete a mock participant where you'll actually go through an entire participant with us from start to finish. We'll pretend like we are a participant in the study, and you'll ask us all the questions, you'll consent us, and you'll do everything that would be part of the initial assessment. You can also call us anytime with questions. We'll be sending you out emails every day with study tips and training tips and things like that. And so on all of those emails, there are all of our phone numbers, all of our contact information where you can reach us. So please feel free to reach us any time of day, even if it's the middle of the night and you're trying to enroll a participant, we are around. At this point, you've completed the entire first part of the Women's Health Study training. So thank you for sitting and listening and practicing and going through all of these steps with me. You can let your coordinator know and someone from the UNC team know that you are ready to complete a mock participant at any time. And at this point, you can close out of the video. Thank you so much.